An infinitive is a verbal noun, meaning it can function as a verb as well as a noun. English infinitives can be identified by the following construction: the preposition to plus a verb, like to follow or to teach. Listen to this example in English. I like to learn. In that sentence, to learn functions as the verb. But in the sentence, to learn is my favorite activity, to learn functions as a noun. The Greek infinitive can function as an adverb, noun, adjective, and verb. The Greek infinitive has tense and voice, just like a verb, but unlike a verb, it does not have person or number. This example comes from Colossians 1:19, which reads, "For in him the fullness of God was pleased to dwell." Now that information that I just mentioned before can be found in the morph line of the reverse interlinear pane, down here. Here's our infinitive, and the information labeled here is verb, aorist active, infinitive. But you notice that there is person and number missing. If we looked over here at this verb that occurs before it, eudokesin, this has verb, aorist active, indicative, third person singular. So here in the morph line, you can see the difference between what's called a finite verb, for example, this one here, and the infinitive here. And I just want to make one other note about translation. The Greek infinitive can be translated into English by supplying the English preposition to along with a verb. And that's what's happened here with this Greek infinitive in the ESV. But the Greek infinitive is not always translated this way, and we'll see the other ways it gets translated in the following videos. The tense of a Greek infinitive verb does not indicate the time of the action, that is, past, present, or future time, only the kind of action or aspect. Here are some general guidelines. The present tense expresses a continual action, the aorist tense expresses an undefined action, and the perfect tense expresses a completed action. We'll return to these in our illustrations. Greek infinitives often work with prepositions, conjunctions, and articles as a singular unit. Because of this, they cannot be translated word for word. This illustration comes from Acts 3:26, which reads, "God, having raised up his servant, sent him to you first, to bless you by turning every one of you from your wickedness." Now let's take a look at the reverse interlinear pane below, and we can see here the Greek preposition en, along with the Greek article to, in the dative case, and then here we have the Greek infinitive, apostrepsin. Now notice how the ESV, which is a fairly word-for-word translation, how it takes it as a unit and not just as individual words. Otherwise, it would read something like, in the turning, so to turn you, in the turning every one of you from your wickedness. Now, if you were to translate it that way, it really wouldn't make any sense. And this is where it's important to understand that a literal translation of something doesn't always mean an accurate translation. So here the ESV is right to take this entire phrase here, into apostrepsin, as a unit and translate it by turning. Now notice, different from the example or illustration that we saw before, this isn't translated with the English preposition to. Instead, it's translated with the English preposition by. The Greek infinitive can be translated in a number of ways. Now, I point out this feature about Greek infinitives working with prepositions and articles and conjunctions because I don't want you to get confused as you work with these different Greek words. Now, you're not going to need to memorize all the different combinations of words that infinitives work with. I just point this out for now to avoid confusion when you see infinitives working with other words like prepositions and articles. Greek infinitives do not have subjects technically, but when they function as a verb, they may often have a noun in the accusative case functioning as a subject. This is referred to as the accusative subject of the infinitive. I'm using Mark 1:14 for this illustration, which reads, "Now after John was arrested, Jesus came into Galilee, proclaiming the gospel of God." Now the first thing I want to point out is how this Greek infinitive is translated. Here's the Greek infinitive, preceded by the article here, ta paradathenai, which is translated, was arrested. If we just looked at the translation, we might think that what we have underneath is a regular finite verb, something with person and number. But this Greek infinitive is functioning like a finite verb, and now we need to look for its subject. Now typically, this would be another word in the nominative case, but instead, because of what this Greek infinitive is doing, we have a word in the accusative case, and that is ton iowanein. And down here at the morph line, we can see that this article is in the accusative case, as well as this noun. I point this out so that you can see the variety of ways that the Greek infinitive is translated. In some cases, it'll take an English preposition. In other cases, it'll be translated as though it's a finite verb and take its subject in the accusative case, as we have here in Mark 1:14. An infinitive may be used to establish a specific point in time with reference to the action of the main verb. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Greek infinitive does not grammaticalize time, but it is used with prepositions and conjunctions to indicate a specific point in time with relation to the verbal action. Now, that was a lot of words. Let me show you what I mean. Here in this sentence, you can see there's a preposition here, before. It comes, or translated from, the Greek preposition pra. And we can see that pra, this Greek preposition, is working together with this Greek article and the Greek infinitive. These three words are working together to establish a specific point in time with relation to the verbal action. In this case, it's before. That is, before you ask, your Father knows what you need. Now, for the most part, you could look at the Greek preposition here and understand that this before has a temporal reference, that is, a reference to time. If you want to double check your work, you can always look down below at the Lounaida line and hover over the reference there. And here you can see that the definition reads, a point of time prior to another point of time, that is, before or previous. And here you can see that the Greek preposition pra is used, but also another preposition, prin. You could even open up the Lexem Syntactic Greek New Testament, Expansions and Annotations. And here in Matthew 6:8, we've come to the entry on the Greek preposition pra in that verse, and its syntactic force or function is labeled as a temporal preposition. Now, this is a lot of detail, but it goes to show you that words work together in units to accomplish certain functions. Let's take a look at a couple other examples. Sometimes an infinitive is used along with a preposition to communicate that one action happened or is happening at the same time as another action. That's what we have here in Matthew 13:4, which reads, "And as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them." Here we have a Greek infinitive underneath this verb sowed, as we can see in the reverse and linear pane here, to, speirain. But this article and this infinitive is also working together the Greek preposition en, which is translated as. And this is actually a common construction we have here, en, to, plus the infinitive, or preposition, article, and the infinitive. And you can also see that these three words work together because of the numbering in this line, 2, 3, and 4. Then comes 5 and 6. Now the Greek preposition en can be translated a number of ways. Here it's translated as, and if we wanted to get more understanding of how this preposition is working here in this verse, we can look at the Lounaida number below. And it reads that en or dia or epi can function as markers of the extent of time within a unit. And it can be translated during, in the course of, within. All of these different translations pointing to one action happening at the same time or around the same time as the main action. And that's what we have here. As he sowed, it's one action. Some seeds fell, and that's another action. These two are happening around the same time. For the construction in tow plus the infinitive, you can also see the English translation when or while instead of as. An infinitive may be used to indicate the reason for the verbal action to which it is related. This is called an infinitive of reason. Now, we've already looked at Matthew 13, this parable of the sower. And the key word that you want to look for, or key words that you want to look for when dealing with the idea of reason, is the words since or because. Now, it may be a little bit puzzling that you've highlighted the infinitive here with the visual filter. And what we've had here doesn't really look like an infinitive. It's just the simple English word had. But, of course, this is coming from the Greek morphology, not the English morphology. And we can see that below here we do have an infinitive. And the idea of reason is caught up with this preposition over here, dia. And if you remember, the infinitives often work with prepositions and articles as a singular unit to express an idea. And here in this context, and with this construction, it's expressing the idea of reason. And you can see that here, that's attached to this preposition, dia and diati and hupa and en, can all be markers of cause or reason, with the translation because of, on account of, by reason of. But as far as that singular infinitive, we can see that its function here is that of a causative infinitive. So, causative infinitive is synonymous with an infinitive of reason. You read the definition there. Use of the infinitive to express the reason or cause of the verb to which it is related. So coming back to the ESV here, we can see that the verb that it's related to is this verb here, sprang up. What is the reason as to why this sprang up? Well, it sprang up because, or since, it had no depth of soil. And in verse 6 we can read the consequence of having no depth. That when the sun rose, it was scorched. And again, here expressing the idea of reason or cause, since it had no root, it withered away. An infinitive may be used to indicate the goal or aim of the verbal action to which it is related. This is called an infinitive of purpose. English translations use words like in order to, in order that, for the purpose of, or simply to. Matthew 6:1 reads, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven." In this verse, we have two infinitives here, but we're only going to focus on one of them. That's the one highlighted here in blue. And you can see that even in English, the idea of purpose is being expressed. Now, if we look at the reverse interlinear pane below, you'll see that we have a couple words working together as one unit to express the idea of purpose. Here we have the preposition pros, the Greek article ta in the accusative case, followed by the Greek infinitive, theathenai. Now, if you've been working with prepositions before, you'll know that pros has a range of meanings. But you can always go to your Lountide numbers below to confirm or find explanation as to how this preposition is functioning. Here, it's a marker of purpose, pointing to the goal of an event or state translated for the purpose of, or for the sake of, or in order to, as we have here in this verse. Now, in the previous video, I showed you the expansions and annotations and how when you have a Greek infinitive by itself, you can look at the resource here and find the syntactic force of the infinitive. But you'll notice something here. Why is this infinitive not labeled an infinitive of purpose, since we can clearly see that in the English translation? Well, that goes back to how this is annotated. Here we're looking at the Greek infinitive, theathenai. But if we move back up to not just the article, but we move all the way up to the preposition, we'll see that this preposition is labeled a preposition of purpose. So sometimes the annotation goes back to one word and not the entire phrase. So you want to be aware of that when infinitives are working with other words like prepositions or articles. Now going back to our verse in Matthew 6:1, the infinitive shows us that being seen by others is not the goal or aim of practicing righteousness. James 1:18 reads, "Of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures." In the reverse interlinear pane below, we can see the kind of construction that's used here in order to express purpose. Here we have the Greek preposition eis, and it's numbered 6 here, followed by the Greek article ta, and then here we have the Greek infinitive enai. Together, these three express result. Now, as I pointed out in other videos, when you have a preposition included in the construction, you can look below at the Louw-Nida number to get further explanation on its function. Here we have a marker of intent, often with the implication of expected result. And here you have the translation for the purpose of or in order to. Now, in reading this, you might be a little confused as to what the difference is between purpose and result. And if you were to look in the expansions and annotations resource, you'd see that sometimes a word is labeled either infinitive of result or infinitive of purpose. Sometimes it could go either way. Just to clarify, infinitive of purpose often focuses on the intent with an aim or a goal in mind. Result, however, focuses on consequence instead of aim or goal. So you want to keep in mind that oftentimes the same constructions are used, so this is a matter of context and interpretation. Here in the expansions and annotations, we see that enai, the Greek infinitive in our verse, is labeled with the syntactic force of result. And so, going back up to our verse here in the ESV, of his own will he brought us forth by the word of truth, with the consequence that we would be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. That is to say, us being a kind of first fruits is the outcome or consequence of him bringing us forth by the word of truth. The infinitive can stand in place of a noun, performing a variety of functions. Here are a few of them. The infinitive has a range of uses. Now, in our videos, we've only covered a few of them. Here you can see in the Lexham Syntactic Greek New Testament Glossary the different uses of the infinitive, some which I've covered, some which I haven't. For example, the substantival infinitive. If you'd like to see some examples of this use, you can always go to the Expansions and Annotations resource, and with Control F on a PC or Command F on a Mac, you can do a simple find within this resource. If you type in substantival, you can see use highlighted here, and you can always right-click on it, make sure you have selection, substantival infinitive, and say, search this resource. And when you do that, you get a list in your search results of all the places where this label has been used to tag a word or construction.